All right, let's begin with the latest as Cyclone Biporjoy, which has been classified as a severe cyclonic storm, continues to make landfall as we speak. It's been hitting the Jakhau port of Gujarat at a speed of 115 kilometers per hour. The landfall process is expected to continue till midnight. The eye of the storm is set to be around 50 kilometers in diameter. We're going to first play out for you all the latest ground reports coming in from our correspondents on the field.
Yeah, definitely. You can see the wind speed is consistently increasing and multiplying. The wind velocity is multiplying and inching towards the landfall. And as predicted, as confirmed by IMD, the process of the landfall has been initiated 90 kilometers away from here, Jakhau port, where the landfall process has been initiated, and the landfall will have its major impact here in Mandvi. See the wind speed. Wind speeds are continuously increasing. Weather condition is deteriorating, and you can see beside me, this will multiply and the speed will increase consistently, causing huge amount of damage when it comes to the coast of Gujarat and especially Mandvi, where we are present, and second epicenter is Jakhau port, which is around 90 kilometers away from here. And that's the reason all preventive measures have been taken by the administration, and they are continuously monitoring the situation in coordination with IMD, and it has been focused that minimum damage and at the same time zero casualty is something the focus of the administration is now. And on the other side, you can see the advancement of weather. We are inching towards the landfall and right present at ground zero in Mandvi, which will be one of the epicenter and aftermath of the landfall, which will be worst affected. One of the reason is Mandvi, where we are currently reporting from. Back to you.
All right, to now speak about what the impact is, and of course people have been evacuated, so lives will hopefully be saved and there will not be any more unnecessary loss of lives. But we are seeing large scale destruction possibly of very precious infrastructure. The governments in this area will have to come and create compensation packages to rebuild. This has long-term effects. We're going to speak about some of these issues today. Vimlendu, environmentalist, with me on the show. I'm speaking with GP Sharma, president of Skymet, and Siddharth, Sanyal, chief economist at Bandhan Bank. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening on the India development debate. I want to first get a sense of what's happening with the cyclone. So I'm going to go first to GP Sharma. Mr. Sharma, thank you for joining us. Now we know that the landfall process has begun. It's going to go on till midnight. What does this mean? Does this mean that we now have a clear, restricted view of the extent of damage this cyclone can cause?
Tamanna, the landfall process, as we know, started almost a little more than 2 hours back. Okay, and it's a long drawn process which will go on past midnight and maybe continuing even in the wee hours also. Okay, because it comprises of 3 sections: ahead of the storm, the cloud mass, and then eye of the storm, and the rear section. Okay, forward, rear, all these 3 sections, they are very important. It's a crucial phase of the cyclone as such. It was there for almost about 8 days, and finally we have come to the final and last leg now, which will last for another 6 to 8 hours or so before it moves completely overland. Okay, as we said, the cyclone definitely it had a weakening trend for the last about 6 hours on account of the winds churning with it in the core section of the storm. But then still continues to maintain the intensity of a very severe cyclonic storm. Possibly it may be just a borderline case of severe cyclonic storm and very severe cyclonic storm. But in any case, whatever the case, the damaging potential of the storm remains high, which comes from the high-speed winds. Okay, more from the high-speed winds than the blinding rains as such. Okay, whatever visuals we saw, that flying away of tin roofs, etc., and the collapsing of those trees, etc. It all happens because of these strong winds. Okay, in case time permits, you give me a few more minutes, a little later maybe. I would like to explain why should these damage happen? How does it happen? Okay, cyclones though are not new to us, But why does it happen again and again, and why we can't do anything about that? We can save lives, all right, shifted people, more than 75,000 people, safe shelters, good thing. But then despite that, possibly we incur a lot of losses on account of these cyclone landfalls along our coastline, which is over almost about 7,000 kilometers.
I want to focus on some of those losses, and I'm going to come to Mr. Sanyal on that part of the story right now, because of course lives will be saved, and thankfully we have the weather forecast so we could save those lives, but the damages seem to be extreme. For example, the areas where the cyclone is falling right now, Reliance operates from there. Diesel exports will be hit to Europe. Adani operates the Mundra port there. It's one of the largest commercial, or the largest commercial port in India. So the issue is that how do you protect from this, or is this something you just have to prepare for?
Absolutely, Tamanna. I think this is a very, very pertinent question. You mentioned about the potential infrastructure damages. I'd possibly start from the agro damages or the crop damages that might happen. Thankfully, this is a relatively early phase of sowing. So even if there is and this particular area is typically a very significant area for millets, groundnuts, and other oilseeds, which are a very significant composition of India's overall consumption basket. So first clear effect is that. But thankfully, as I mentioned, that this is the early part of sowing. So even if there is a bit of a damage and weather condition is relatively favorable over the next few months, you still get a second window to recuperate. Hopefully, we are looking forward to that. But your other part of the damage is something to which there is no clear answer. To the extent the private owners and the government setup can provide some bit of early prediction, some bit of temporary cover up, that might actually help to some extent. But there is no clear solution to that. I think we have to learn to live with that. Is what my limited understanding says.
The temporary damage or loss of the ability to work or produce goods and services too is absolutely there. That's one of the issues. But you also have destruction of infrastructure, and that then has long-term impacts. I want to understand the pattern here. And Vimlendu, we have been putting out data on previous damages caused by other cyclones in the recent past. We've chosen just cyclones. I mean, there could be other climatic conditions which create damage. Is this something we need to prepare for now, and not just assume this is going to be a phenomenon that arrives once in a while?
Absolutely, Tamanna. So, we need to understand that, a lot of times we understood disasters or events like these as one-off events. And this clearly is not. If you look at every scientist on this planet has actually predicted and have stated that the intensity of these weather events or climate events, whatever that you want to call it, has increased, and also the frequency of it has increased. So, the cyclone that perhaps we had earlier versus the cyclone that we're having now, and the number of cyclones that we had earlier versus the number of climate events that we're having now, that has increased. There's been a study that came from University of Maryland and University IIT Bombay that clearly also looks at how Arabian Sea, for example, was actually a cooler part, was much cooler than Bay of Bengal. And in last several decades, there's been a change in pattern. There's been almost a degree change of 1.2 degrees centigrade. And therefore, there is an impact. So we need to understand that as much as we are discussing this as a one-off event, there is a pattern, there was a warning. Previous IPCC reports have clearly stated that things like these will happen more deep and more often, and there needs to be a preparedness. But we need to take cognizance of those reports, and we haven't really as a country, as a society, as human beings, as a world, I would say, and I would not really talk just about India, when we have the scientific fraternity telling us that there will be more and more of these extreme climate events happening. How do we prepare ourselves, both in terms of life and livelihood? In fact, rest, right now we're talking about temporary evacuation of around 75,000 people. But, it's not just about that. As in we don't really know what the damage would be. We haven't really seen what this cyclone can possibly do. It still is waiting for a landfall. It's actually beginning its landfall. And maybe this one will not be as tragic as perhaps some of the soothsayers have been saying. But are we prepared for the next one and the next one and the next one? Because every scientist has told us that there will be many, many more of these events that's going to take place.
That's a very good point. And yes, the best thing we can do right now is reduce or completely cut out loss of life to the extent possible, which is what's happening. The thousands of people have been evacuated in very large numbers. Siddharth, Sanyal, I want to come back to the issue of cost of prevention of damage and preparing for climatic conditions, especially when it comes to infrastructure. A cyclone like this means governments then have to spend on restoration, on helping out those who have been impacted. Everyone gets impacted, your daily wage workers, agriculture, as you rightly pointed out. Are we somewhere even estimating the cost of such climatic nightmares?
Virtually impossible, but still there are at least two very different angles. One is the monetary cost. The other part, apart from the danger to life and livelihood, the other part is the loss of time or loss in terms of miscommitments, etc. So, for example, if there is a significant damage to any of the major infrastructure items, so what we basically have seen that some of these things are multi-quarter or multi-year even possibly kind of a restoration job. That means some of the supply chains, value chains, export corridors that we had set up in taking some particular infrastructure into account, we tend to face a new set of question marks around that, and we don't really know to the extent of the damage, how much time we might be taking to restore some of these facilities or come close to that. So this kind of things, some kind of difficulties and derailment of multiple order and multiple dimensions, which are almost nearly impossible to measure and absolutely impossible to predict.
Yeah. GP Sharma, you wanted to come in on why there is infrastructural damage, and can really anything be done, especially when you have cyclones this severe? I mean, we'll have to wait for the process of landfall to end to assess the extent of damage. That'll probably take another 24 to 48 hours to get a complete picture. But is there any way to protect from this?
Difficult to protect, but then you see the testing times start after the cyclone makes a landfall, and there are, okay. It's a very crucial phase. Before the storm hits, there's I will say minimal damage takes place in that phase. But then take these 12 hours or so, when it strikes, when it crosses over, or even the rear section, till such time the landfall is complete. This is a very, very crucial phase, and damage is there. You see, we are in such region, tropical region, where these storms are very, very furious. We are having the meteorological conditions possibly difficult to understand for a layman, that these storms they go through. You see, we have the reversal of air flows, lower levels, higher levels. Even you see, when the storm is passing over a region, when it makes a landfall, you have a very strong winds coming in from one direction. The moment the eye passes, it reverses direction. It is from the other side. Just imagine a thing being shaken initially from left and then from right, or vice versa. As such, that is what leads to, along with the torrential rains, maximum damage. We see that's we saw in the visuals also how the things are collapsing, how the trees are falling. The tree which didn't fall earlier, even the strong winds were there. The moment I crossed over and the other side, the winds started, it collapsed. Okay, because it is giving way. The momentum keeps on increasing. The strong winds and the heavy rainfall together is a catastrophic effect they bring. The damaging potential keeps on increasing till such time the storm passes away completely, and that is how. And we cannot do much about the assets as such, which are fixed. The only thing which has been done by the government, which could be, that is the shifting to the safe places, thousands of people. That's what can be done. Otherwise, as I said, the testing time will be now. The problem has increased that it's a dark hours now. In the evening or night hours, it's very difficult for the agencies to cope with, to take stock as to what has happened, where has happened. It's very difficult. We have to wait now after the completion of landfall and thereafter daylight tomorrow, wherein the rescue, relief, and rehabilitation procedure that can be set in motion. Okay, that's only after that. It's delayed landfall has aggravated our problem by many folds. Even 4 to 5 hours of this time was a very, very precious time. Had it been a little earlier, things would have been different. But unfortunately, we have very, very difficult things at hand now for the next about 12 hours as far as the storm is concerned. Yes.
Okay, so that gives us a good perspective that because this has been a delayed landfall, its impact may be worse. Agencies will find it tougher to go in for rescue and relief operations. But Vimlendu was making a point earlier about recognizing that this is no longer one-off. Vimlendu, do we need to include the concept of climate proofing our infrastructure into these plans, especially, say, in coastal regions?
Absolutely, and we have every evidence and everyone telling us that we need to be climate calamity prepared, as in right now what Mr. Sharma was actually talking about. We need to also understand that, because of the climate change and the impact that it has, the duration of the landfall is also going to increase. And that's what the prediction of University of Maryland and the scientists of India have actually, engineers and scientists have actually said. So, my problem in all of this is that all this information, all of this wisdom is, we have known this, and we've known that this is going to happen, as in we've had several IPCC reports and the world fraternity of scientists tell us about preparedness. But our coastal line is extremely exposed. There are no infrastructure norms that it's actually followed in terms of construction, in terms of real estate, in terms of looking at mangroves, in terms of looking at natural ways of really combating something like this. Perhaps, indeed, we can't blame India alone for the heat that is generated in Arabian Sea. As I said, that Arabian Sea is warmer. It's become a warm pool today than Bay of Bengal. But India still, as a country, it is one of the most affected countries, one of the most climate vulnerable countries, and also the most, the poorest of the poor people, by the way, in all of this. The images that you see, people living in tin shed and in those tents and in small mud houses, those are the people who are actually going to lose their life and lose their livelihood. The rich are not going to get affected by a climate event, and this visual is clearly that. As in, indeed, a wind speed of 125 kilometers per hour is going to affect everyone. But perhaps the rich have found refuge. The poor are still sticking by their fishing boat and the fishing net and their little hut. And that's what it is. Climate vulnerability affects the poorest of the poor the most. And I'm sure Mr. Sanyal and everyone else know about this. And that's the prediction, that climate event affects the poor the most. And we need to really have preparation around it. And we need to really look at the next event. And therefore, we need to have policies, as you rightly said, that what sort of an infrastructure policy?
Let me come to you, Mr. Sanyal, on this. Yes, that's a good point, Vimlendu. Let me come to you, Mr. Sanyal, on this. There is an estimate of the RBI that says that India will have to spend about 85 lakh crores by 2030 to climate proof, to prepare for climate change. And this needs to be something that businesses put into the plan as well now, isn't it?
Yeah, the good thing is that I'm glad that you mentioned this, that of late, as you have seen, from a financial sector's point of view, RBI has come out with some very detailed study about the long-term implications, the dimensions of climate change that is taking place, which is impacting India, how things can change, and what kind of intervention is optimal for the banking sector, the financial sector, the economy as a whole. I think that's a huge change. That's a huge awareness drive that the RBI has initiated in a very, very effective fashion. The other part here is that if you see that the private sector also is actually joining hand today to get into discussions, to get into some kind of an analysis and estimates that what kind of climate proof they need to do. I think the awareness part has increased very significantly. Still, we have stayed relatively less focused on long-term and ESG related issues and more commercial issues still. But the silver line is that is changing at the margin, and we have to embrace that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today as we're tracking this story. Our hopes and prayers are with those who have been hit by Cyclone Biporjoy. We hope that there is no loss of life and the least possible loss of property, infrastructure and damage. We'll take a very short break, but stay tuned. A lot more coming up on the other side.